federal stimulus money is to be considered separate from the budget. So it's not like this money is coming into our budget, but it is in the form of a grant. We must make application as a school district to access this money. And in the IDEA, the special ed component, that grant has just become available. And in fact, Christine Danjo, who is our Director of Pupil Personnel Services, is working with Carl Nelson to fill out the grant in order to access that money for fiscal year 10. The grant is very specific. It says that 50% of the money targeted for each year can only be used for the recovery pieces. That is maintenance of effort, doing the kinds of programs that you currently have in place. The other 50% must be investment purposes, must be for the future. But in both cases, you must not budget so that when this grant goes away in 2 years, you're not left with a huge debt. So what we're going to do with the special ed funding is we're going to target 50% of the money, and Carl will go over this, about $160,000 towards the FY10 budget for the recovery piece. And we're going to use that money to pay the salaries, or a portion of the salaries, of paraprofessionals who are working in special education. That's an important distinction because under federal mandates, if you use that money to pay the salaries of teachers or administrators, then automatically 9% of that money is held by the federal government. So you're really not getting a maximum bang for your buck. The other 50% of the IDEA money is going to be targeted toward opening a new program here at our middle school. And it's a program that's been under the jurisdiction of the SEAM Collaborative for many years. North Reading is going to take that program over. We're going to hire the teacher. We're going to hire the paraprofessional. And we feel that in doing that, we will be able to save the tuition costs that we would be paying to outside special ed providers. So that's investing in the future. It's going to take some time to build that program up. We feel confident that we can do that, and in the long run, we feel that there'll be a return on that investment immediately by some level of savings for next year, but then on into the future as well. And so that's the future investment piece of it. So that's the stimulus money from special education, and it's about $640,000 over 2 years. The other pot of money is considered also stimulus money. However, that money has been targeted by the Department of Education to raise any community that is funding under what is called the foundation budget. So many terms. And so it's been determined that North Reading needs to spend additional money, about $860,000 or so, $853,000 to be exact, to bring us up in FY10 to the foundation level. Now, all along, there has been no indication of what happens in FY11. The only dollar figure that's been put out on the table is the dollar figure for FY10. And again, it'll be a grant application that the school district must make in order to access that money. And the grant must follow the same provisions that I mentioned before: recovery and reinvestment. The school district will need to report on its progress, both on the recovery and the reinvestment, on a quarterly basis. And we need to show that that money is being used wisely and it's being used to improve student achievement. The Commissioner of Education and all superintendents will need to sign off on a series of assurances to make sure that that money is being targeted, since it is federal money, for the purposes that I've stated. Now, in the back of my mind, in the mind of many other superintendents, there's always been the feeling that in FY11 there would be additional money. No dollar figures have ever been released for what that amount will be in FY11. So the direction that I've recommended to the school committee, at least in our preliminary budget development, has been to take that $853,000 to separate it into two portions, FY10 and FY11. And basically allocating about $400,000 to $425,000 in FY10 and holding over a similar amount for FY11. And then if we take that $425,000 and break it down into the recovery piece and the reinvestment piece, that I'm going to recommend that we target about $200,000 directly against the problem that we're going to explain. With the idea that another $200,000 I must also will be available for us immediately once the applications are released, but that I'm going to have to show that as some level of an investment. I'm not clear on how that's going to happen, because I know that I'm not going to be able to put all of that money directly against an offset on the budget. And that's the challenge. This is a federal grant, and it's by application, and there's a high level of accountability. And I'm not going to sign an assurances where I can't live up as a school district and stand behind those assurances, because I don't want North Reading to get to the point where it would have to return any money in the future. So the only other piece, and then I'll stop, is that the picture was looking very bright in my mind with this investment money up to about 2 weeks ago. And that was when all cities and towns in the Commonwealth were notified of the shortfall, the budget shortfall, in the current fiscal year, FY09, for the final quarter of the current fiscal year. And we were notified that we were going to lose about $650,000 of current Chapter 70 money for this fiscal year. But not a problem, because you can apply, or the school superintendent can apply to use stimulus money. The targeted stimulus money that was, as I said, set aside for 10 and 11 is now being used to complete FY09, the current fiscal year. We had 1 week turnaround from that notice to submit a federal grant. Rules are a little more relaxed, and so Carl Nelson, working with the town's finance director, we've made a decision. We've submitted our grant, and we're going to use, going to replace that loss of Chapter 70 money against health insurance to the amount of $650,000 for the final quarter. Now, what does that say to me? That says to me that if there was an uncertainty about the amount of money available under the stimulus grant for fiscal 11, the fact that we're now using, and every city and town is using this money in this way, that because there's a finite amount of money in the overall stimulus money coming to the Commonwealth, the chances of any stimulus money being left to fund unmet needs in 11, I think is virtually none. And while the state has not come out with that and put that in print, every indication is moving in that direction. So with that backdrop, I think that helps to explain what Mrs. Bacher has said, that this has been an incredibly challenging year for anyone to plan on budgets, and that there will be many questions that will need to be answered prior to the town meeting. This is an enormous deficit that we're facing, and every time when we feel that we're about ready to close the gap widens again with a whole new set of rules. So I think I'm going to ask Carl to run through a few slides, and then it's probably appropriate for the committee to discuss what it wants to do with the budget, and then we'll open it to public.
Thank you. Can people see the screen clearly? The lights are okay? There are only 6 slides, so we're not going to bore you with a lot of minutiae, but to try to provide a context and a general overview for where we stand. So let's begin with an overview. You see on the top that the school department has developed a budget for FY10 that we used to call level services. We probably should change that moniker. It should really be called adjusted level services, but that was our starting point. That was our attempt to extend this year's complement of staffing and programs to FY10. And it was going to cost us $24,233,000 to replicate this year's services next year. As the budget process has unfolded, we've had to make adjustments to that. We begin by what we call the level 1 cuts, which I'll detail in a moment, but we reduced the level services budget by that $439,000 figure. We then realized, as the budget continuum kind of unfolded, that we had additional adjustments that we would make to the budget request, which I'll also detail momentarily. So our adjusted budget request at this moment in time is $22,960,000. I alluded a moment ago to the level 1 cuts. Many of you have seen these cuts in various forms, and as you can see, there are 21 cuts to what we formerly called level services. And while it's probably not necessary to go through each of these 21 cuts at this time, it's worthwhile emphasizing that some of these cuts that we've already accepted are not going to be easy for us to fulfill and carry out. And I'll just point out a couple. If you look at number 10, which is over in that left column at the bottom, eliminate all small capital. Annually in the school budget, we include a small capital figure so that we can replace broken furniture, so that we can buy new slide projectors, and primarily so we can continue our annual updating of textbooks. So we have, right off the bat, reduced that item from the budget. It was one of the many difficult cuts we made back when we were moving towards the probably December-January period. Another one that I would just point out is number 12, over in the right column. Decrease all expense budgets by 5%. Once again, we have determined that we are in fact going to do this, but it's not easier said than done. We're going to be reducing every single school budget, maintenance budget, business office budget, superintendent budget, school committee budget by 5%, which isn't easy when we've been level funding these budgets for many years. So I thought it was worthwhile to just point out those 2 examples of some difficult choices we've already made, and we'd be happy to discuss further any of those 21 if anyone has any questions. But at this point, I'm going to move on to the next slide.
Carl?
Yes?
Retirees attrition, is that just the difference between higher salaries of teachers retiring and assumed younger teachers?
Exactly. You know, a lot of people sometimes don't understand why they may see some advertisements for new teachers that we'll be hiring next year. And even in this era of budget cuts, it is true, we will be hiring some new teachers next year because they'll be replacing retirees. And as you mentioned, Jeff, retirees, by the time they leave service, tend to be at the top of the scale, and those we bring in are going to be less expensive. So we call that, I call that retirees attrition.
Just for clarification too, I mean, these aren't all necessarily cuts, and Jeff points out one is really savings, and then there's several added fees in here as well, but it all, we packaged it into level 1 cost basis.
Thank you.
think it's important to point out